I was just joking that I was geeking out over this presentation as I was updating it for today because I really love talking about this stuff. So you're gonna get it. It's gonna be the fire hose today. But feel free to ask questions and. For those of you that joined us on our last or our first kind of installment of this two-part series, we talked a little bit about earned media and getting yourself as an expert or your firm or your business featured in the press. So I'm going to lead in with a little bit of a similar start just to set the stage, and then we'll dig right in on original content. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right. And there we have it. So we're going to create some compelling content today. Awesome. My big joke is that when I was a baby publicist, we used to have to answer 3 questions before the press hung up on us, basically, back in the days when you smiled and dialed still. And those 3 questions were, so what, who cares, and why bother? So I always like to frame my presentations answering those questions first. And essentially, the so what is that it used to be that a handshake was your first impression. Now it's your digital footprint. And so much of that digital footprint is the kind of content you put out, whether it's social media, your website, your blog, being featured as a contributing columnist in a media platform. That's where people are looking. They're checking you out on LinkedIn and they're looking you up online first. So you really want to be conscious that digital footprint kind of matches who you are in real life. Who cares? People are nosy. They're going to judge you. Sorry. People really do want to know who they're working for, who they're working with, who they're hiring. And so a lot of people are looking. And the why bother is, look, we're all in this for the long haul. As an entrepreneur, I am unemployable by other people. So my brand matters a lot. But I think too, as individuals, you don't have that gold watch and 30-year career anymore. So your personal brand certainly comes with you as you go throughout your career. So the why bother is really because we're all in it for the long haul. All right. Oh, I just click. That's easy. All right. So also to set the stage, just so that you see how this fits into the kind of work that a firm like mine does, we focus on thought leadership. So no matter what it is that you're selling, and we're all selling something, whether it's a professional service, an item, B2B, B2C, it doesn't matter. Thought leadership can really be the key to elevating your business and your personal brand. Thought leadership is defined as a critical business strategy that's an effective way to set you apart from the competition. And Forbes really drills down and says also that it's something that can essentially that you should be able to be profiting from, right? It is all about the bottom line in business. So when it comes to how that factors in to, let's say, a campaign that we would look at for our clients, earned media is being quoted in the press. That's the easiest way to think about it. You can't pay to be there. You have to earn it through pitching yourself, through having an expertise. Original content, which is what we're talking about today, is really anything that you create full stop, right? You can write an article, you can have a blog, you can post on social media, you can create a website. Those are all the pieces of original content or examples of original content that you can create. Social media, and specifically LinkedIn, is another fabulous platform to be seen as an expert and an advisor and a thought leader. And then the last piece is, kind of what I'm doing today, speaking, whether it's virtually or in person, having partnerships, being kind of elevated on a stage in front of an audience you want to be in front of, sharing information that is of importance to them. So that's the umbrella of thought leadership. So what is original content? I think that the first thing you should probably know is what it isn't. Original content is not a sales pitch. It is not you saying, look at me, I'm so great, hire us, we're the best. It's if you go out and that's the lens that you're looking at it under, it's not going to work. Not only are you going to annoy people, but you are not going to be able to place a piece of content with a media outlet. You're going to have a lot of unsubscribes from that newsletter. It's just, coming at this as if it is a sales vehicle is really the wrong approach. The biggest thing to remember with original content is that it has to be of service to that end audience. So your readers on your blog or your network on LinkedIn who's reading your posts, they have to have some key takeaway. Now remember, you're an expert and you may not think of yourself as an expert or a thought leader, but chances are that, you have something unique to say. And the real point, and this gets to the third bullet here, is figure out your unique point of view. Have an opinion. sometimes wrong, seldom in doubt, right? And I think for those of us, obviously, for those of you that are in more regulated industries, that, you know, that has parameters around it. But I think it's really important to come out and lead with a strong point of view that reflects the kind of professional you are. And again, I've worked with, literally, I was sitting down with a woman who ran a multinational billion-dollar company. And she was like, well, why do I have to say that's any different? I was like, I wanted to shake her. I was like, are you serious? You have so much expertise, so much insight. So remember that you do too, right? We all have experiences that we can, you know, showcase through thought leadership and through a point of view on our areas of expertise, our industries. And the last piece about original content is make it memorable. I worked with a woman who was a financial services executive. She's also a corporate board director. She survived the miracle on the Hudson. She also survived like 3 other plane crashes. And I was like, I love you, Marianne, but I'll meet you there. Like, I'm never traveling with you, right? But when she went through this experience of, you know, surviving the miracle on the Hudson, she wrote this fabulous article all about how passion and purpose was nothing without perspective. And before she had this moment in her life, she felt she had lost that perspective. Well, the net of her original piece of content, which we published on a career site, you know, wasn't a super known, you know, brand name. It wasn't like a Forbes column or anything like that. But she merchandised that piece of content, that article that she placed, and she ended up getting 4 legitimate board inquiries. It's really hard to get picked to be on a corporate board. And as a result of her leveraging this original piece of content, she made some really serious gains in her career goals. So I think it's always important to remember, if you can make it memorable, make it make it personal in an appropriate way, and then you can leverage it, you can go a long way with original content, depending on your goals. So let's talk about that. What is your goal? You know, a lot of times it's to raise visibility. Sometimes it's ego. Sometimes you're like, you know what? I'm tired of this bozo down the block getting, you know, all this attention. I know more than he or she, and I want to be up and out. You know, it can be to entertain, inform, to teach, just to establish your brand. But you have to be really clear on what your goal is. The second thing you need to be really clear on is, who is your audience? Are you looking to talk to people in your industry? Are you going to be speaking in jargon and getting really into the weeds on the topics that you're addressing? Or are you looking for a broader audience? Are you looking, if your goal is to educate people who may need your product, services, or who may want, you know, to bring you and your company in on a project? Think about what your goal is. Now, Seth Godin talks about having a remarkable piece of content, and I'm reading because I want to quote appropriately. He says, he breaks the words into sections: remark and able. Will people be able to make remarks about your presentation, or in this case, he talks about presentations a lot, but I think it really applies to original content. Will people be able to remark on your original content, on your article or your blog? And are they able to remember your stories so they can remark them to others? It's a way to kind of think about this as you orient your strategy. And then the last thing is, look, you have to answer those same questions, right? Is somebody going to read your article or check out your social media feed or look at, you know, what you've published and not care and not get why this is important? You have to answer, so what, who cares, and why bother? So now another thing to level set, what is original content? Like, what counts, right? There are many, the written world. You don't want me editing your original videos, or, you know, you don't want me art directing on an infographic. So we're going to focus on infographics, totally talking about videos. Video is everything right now, especially with the new LinkedIn video feed and function. Research and white papers are fabulous pieces of original content. Newsletters, we'll get a little bit more into kind of what makes a great newsletter. Surveys, content curation, believe it or not, really is an excellent way to create some original content. You can pick the 5 best business books and put them into a blog, or you can pick the 4 changes in tax law and put that into, that's a form of curating content, right? And put that into an article or even a podcast. Podcasts, totally a great piece of original content. podcasts are blowing up right now. I know so many professionals who have podcasts for a variety of reasons. It, serves as a great ego stroke to your referral, sources. You can invite them in for an interview. It's also a great way to showcase that thought leadership. So original content means these kinds of things. And again, for the purpose of today, we're really going to dig in on what a written piece of original content looks like, because I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of people to create. But again, the thought process that goes into all of these is always going to be what we're talking about, always going to be really strategic and thoughtful. You gotta make it useful and usable, okay? So number one with original content, if you're talking about writing something, have a fabulous headline. And I'll show you some examples of all of these in just a moment, but you gotta have that zinger. Now, I'm not saying you have to have like total clickbait, like the things that you read at like the bottom of some of those, news websites that are like, I can't even think of them. Clickbait when you see it, right? And you don't wanna necessarily do that, but you wanna tell people what it is that they're gonna get if they read your article. You want to keep it like maybe even 50 characters or less, especially for LinkedIn. You want to keep it tight, punchy, interesting, and informative. Again, back to that audience. Oh, you know what else you can, as a point though, with headlines, don't ask questions. You've probably seen them, do business schools breed arrogance? Stuff like that. And instead you want to kind of flip it, right? So instead of asking a question, you want to state your position, back to point of view. So instead of saying, do business schools breed arrogance? You can say, business schools breed arrogance. Maybe you're taking a stand on that and that's what you believe. 12 reasons business schools breed arrogance. How business schools breed arrogance. Making the topic up, but you see how it kind of can be flipped. Question headlines, just not best practices. Back to knowing your audience. If your goal is to really kind of dig in your industry and become a known thought leader in that narrow space, you're going to be having a very different kind of piece of content. You're going to be using jargon. You're going to be really getting in the weeds on your topics, and you're going to be talking about complex issues. If your audience, let's say, is more general and you're looking to really educate people about your area of expertise, you're going to be much more broad. You're going to be thinking about outlets, media outlets that you might be pitching this article to that are going to be much more broad. So you always want to have that audience in mind. Another thing that's really important, and actually OK Dork, which I had never heard of before, but they do a ton of research on, guess what, original content, recently analyzed 3,000 LinkedIn articles, published articles that people had posted on LinkedIn, and revealed that the most shared articles had an average of 5 sub-headlines in the story. So you want to make your piece of content really digestible. You want it to be those 4 things. And you may not have to call it that, but you want to bullet out the 4 pieces of takeaway. And we'll talk in a minute a little bit about some tricks that you can use to orient your thinking as you're sitting down to kind of create this piece. But you really want to break it down. You want there to be really key takeaways. You want it to, even as we scan, because as we all know, everybody's got the attention span of like a fruit fly these days. As you're scanning, like point 1, not interested. Point 2, got it. Okay, that's interesting to me. I'm going to dig in there and read that point. Scan down again. You hit that 3rd or 4th point. Boom, you've taken away that remarkable content that you've remembered. Because again, people are scanning, people are reading quickly, and you want your blog or byline or website even to have those digestible pieces so that when people scan it and look at it quickly, they're still retaining information. Which brings us to length. Yes, it's the internet. Yes, most media outlets even will go up to, let's say, 1,000 words. 1,000 words is a lot. I think the sweet spot for any sort of, article, again, byline, blog, anything like that is really 500 to 700 words, which means you don't have a lot of space. So you have to be really clear, again, back to what's the takeaway, how'd you break it down, who's your audience, really consider that length as you're sitting down to write. And the last thing is use data. You can have an opinion and you are absolutely, as an expert in your field, entitled to that opinion. But when you can back it up with a couple of key data points, it really helps. Even if it's something that you can't necessarily cite, you can link to another article or a non-competing source, and you can feed in that information in order to kind of reinforce and support your point of view with an outside source. So I'm going to actually share this with everybody after the event, but this is essentially a story map that we've developed that really helps, our clients and folks in our network understand how to break down writing their first piece of original content, writing that first byline article. So right back at the top, you've got that audience. One of the other things that I love to have people really think about before they sit down to even write, what do you want people to get from this? How do you want them to think about the topic that you're presenting to them? How do you want them to feel about it? And is there a call to action? Is there something that you want them to do? Now, of course, the natural call to action is you want them to call you and hire you, or hire your company, or engage you in some sort of work, because we're all doing this for that bottom line goal. But really, you have to focus on kind of what is it that they can do. Encourage them to do one thing if you're sharing insights and advice. Encourage them to continue pursuing research around one topic. Really think about what that call to action is for your reader, because it's going to make it more concrete and it's going to make it a better piece. Now, over on the left-hand side here, we've got your remarkable content, anecdotes, analogies, data, putting that all in kind of one spot and then tying it to, as you'll see, each of these takeaways. 4 is not the limit. You could do 3, you could do 10. But having those pieces on the left-hand side to really tie to and support each one of your pieces of takeaway is going to strengthen the information you're trying to share. So we'll share this with you afterwards. And now I'm going to give you some examples. So Seth Godin, he keeps coming up, is kind of a known guy, right? He was one of the big, business bloggers. He's a huge best-selling author, and his blog is super popular. So if we're going to look at kind of a best practices, I would say he writes great content. Check out his blog. But if you look at his top 100 blog posts, these headlines are kind of awesome, right? Don't shave the yak. I don't know what the hell that means, but I'm interested, right? He's got my attention. So don't shave the yak is an awesome headline. Again, ode, how to tell a great story. I know exactly what I'm getting from that article. I know that I'm going to go in there and I'm going to get good takeaway. I'm going to get, salient points if I'm looking to improve my storytelling. Same with the third here. Advice for authors, right? Boom, solid, done, I got it. He's a business expert. He's a best-selling author. I'm definitely looking to Seth if I'm trying to write a business book. I'm thinking, okay, this guy's going to give me some good insights. Now, I have to brag about some of my clients a little bit, but it's only because we've been really successful with placing original content for them. So I want to tell you a little bit about Marilyn. We were able to place an article by Marilyn into Entrepreneur. Marilyn is the CEO of Atlantic Infra. It's a construction company in New Jersey. They actually, she jokes that we fill potholes. That's what they do. And as a woman in a very male-dominated industry, she did a special, kind of a fabulous branding coup for her company. She's known as the Lady in Red. So in this sea of old white dudes in navy suits, she's the Lady in Red. And that's a big part of their brand as a company and her brand as a business leader. And so she knew that she wanted to go out and talk a little bit about what it was to be a woman in this industry. She felt that that was important to kind of not only give back to the women who were coming up, but also to, grow her brand. This was very on brand for her to write an article about this topic. So what we did is we made sure that number one, we knew we were targeting entrepreneur. So we made sure that we knew their guidelines. Most of these media outlets that you might be trying to place an article with are going to have really specific submission guidelines on their website. They don't hide it. It's not, a secret. They make it really clear what they're looking for. And when you're targeting a particular, whether if it's an industry vertical, or you're targeting a particular news outlet, you got to pay attention to what they're covering, because if you can mimic the style, if you can mimic, the delivery with your own point of view, of course, but if you can kind of fall in line with the types of things that they're sharing, the types of articles they're running, you're going to have a much higher hit rate. So what we did here is, of course, we talked about, she brought this personal story in, right in the lead here. You see that she's talked about how she's kind of a second generation woman in construction in her family. It made it really personal. She's got her, as you can see, 7 ways that women in construction can pave the way in this field. She's outlined, you're going to get key takeaway here. And the other thing that she did here that I think was really smart is she included, and of course this is an entrepreneur's guidelines will tell you this, she included links to support a lot of the points she was making. Entrepreneurs really looking for a high level of writing. And so if you're interested in entrepreneur, I would say maybe, try something somewhere else first, and maybe step up to entrepreneur because they have a pretty high threshold. But Entrepreneur really wants you to have that kind of journalistic style where you're quoting outside sources, you're heavily relying on that and data points. But this is, again, an example of kind of how that can be done for an outlet like Entrepreneur. This is another client of ours that we love. This is Leslie Fertel. She is the CEO and founder of a legal staffing agency called Tower Legal Solutions. And this one's really cool, and I'm sharing it because it's kind of a 1-2 punch. What we've been able to do here is, this is an article that she authored, and we placed it in Attorney at Work, which is a legal publication. But as you see with my arrow that I've indicated, we've also been able to plug a survey that they did. So survey, original content piece, numero uno. Article about survey, original content piece, numero dos. You got to make this stuff work for you, right? So this was a kind of a coup for the client being able to leverage both of these things in a really prominent way. Here we have a third client. Kelly Frawley and Emily Pollack are matrimonial and family law attorneys. We work a lot in the legal space. And what they have done is we've created a column for them in Forbes. I will not warn, I'm not going to do that. Everything's on the record. I will mention that if anybody has any questions about kind of the editorial aspect of being a Forbes contributor versus joining one of their Forbes business councils, I'm happy to talk to you about that offline. Again, I've got lots of opinions that I'm not going to share here, but this is a true kind of editorial column that we've been able to secure for them. And one of the goals of, frankly, your original content outreach may be to secure a regular column. Places like Thrive Global, which is Arianna Huffington's, air quotes, it's not really new, but we'll call it new. Her site, since she exited Huffington Post, is a place where they have lots of contributors. There are certain websites where you can actually secure a column and publish, on your own schedule. And, you're not paying to be, published there. You're not a writer, right? You're an expert and a thought leader, and you're doing this for your own goals, but you're also not paying to play. You're not paying for that column space. So with Kelly and Emily, what we've done is we've identified a swim lane, they call it at Forbes. And everything in this column, which is on their leadership page, is all about how divorce, the intersection rather, of divorce and business. And so we've got 3+ years of content up there, but it's all about that intersection. And in each article, what we do is we have kind of a similar format, right? Everything is consistent. We set up the issue, we connect it to that swim lane of, the world of business and divorce. Even the second one here about navigating back to school plans, there's a business tie-in. We also break down subheads and include those like key takeaways that we talked about before. Consistency, like I said before, a huge thing. You want people to come to your column, to look at your content, and you want to kind of train them as what to expect. You don't want to let them down and have kind of one schlocky piece, especially if you have a column and you've secured that opportunity. You want your tone to be consistent. You want the quality of your writing to be consistent. You want your topics to be consistent, and you really want to be consistent with supporting that with, again, those data points, those analogies, those links to outside sources. It's really important. Consistency is, I would say, one of the golden rules. So here we have an example of how a blog actually got flipped into a press piece, right? So, extending from our conversation last time where we talked about how to pitch the press, you can actually take a blog and leverage it in like a multitude of ways. So this is our client, Gotham Foot Care. The guy on the left is Dr. Miguel Cunha. He's got a unique practice in that he's kind of not your dad's podiatrist. I mean, look at those biceps, I'm just saying. Anyway, Dr. Cunha is fabulous. He's kind of known as Dr. Gotham in New York City, and they really service a younger clientele, a lot of athletes, marathoners. And one of the blogs that we did for them was a play on the book series that was like, Eat This, Not That. So we did a column, Wear This, Not That, where we recommended kind of the better option for shoes. And this was all the way back in January of 2020, which of course feels like it was 20 years ago. But it was essentially kind of looking at what winter shoes and going into spring, are really bad for your feet. And what are some examples of that same style that are a little bit better for you and why? And so out of that blog, we created a pitch. And because the blog was kind of so vivid, and it was really, as I talked about before, it was just a bunch of shoes, right? It was a curation of these different shoes and the kind of good, better, best options. And, it played out as a segment even on the page. So when we went to think about how can we use this piece of content in a multitude of ways, we thought this is already a pitch. So we sent it over to our producer contact at Pix News, and they picked it up, and we had a fabulous segment out of it. So this is all to kind of show you that it's a lot of work to create a piece of original content. Like, it's a lot of work. It's free, if you're not counting your time, but it is a lot of work, and you want to make it work for you. You want to figure out a way to take one thing, one article, one byline, one whatever, and turn it into 10. And again, we're going to talk in a second about ways to do that and ways to leverage that. But before we get there, I want to just do a little bit of a recap. And again, we spoke about this last time, but I think it's super important to understand where paid media, which is advertising, and there's a place for advertising in, most industries, right, overlaps with owned media and earned media. As we talked about in our last session, earned media is where a press outlet writes about you. You can't pay to be there, like in an ad, but you have shown your worth. You have shown that you are of service with your information and your content and your expertise to, that end audience, to the reporter and to their readers or viewers. Then you have owned media, and owned media is really kind of the bucket that we're talking about today. It's something that you can create full stock, that you, whether it's your website, your social media feed, your original content, you're creating that full stock. And that is what you, as an expert, thought leader, business owner, employee, you own. So converged media is kind of the sweet spot in the middle, but there's a place for all of these. And I kind of wanted to, again, explain that so that as we move forward, you'll see, how that kind of, I don't want to say gets fuzzy, but how you can take owned media and kind of shift it into that earned space by placing your articles or your blogs on these outside media sources. And so that's where this all kind of connects. So now what? You've written your piece. This is very exciting. What are you going to do with it, right? How are you going to get visibility for this original content? And so I've teed up 3 face-offs, right? We have your owned versus earned. Now, we just talked about the difference between owned versus earned. We talked about owned are the things you create, and earned are where essentially a media outlet, or even let's say a partner who puts you up on stage in front of their clients. That's earned, right? You've been given that opportunity. My feeling is that if you're going to go ahead and create a written piece or a video piece or, any of an infographic, any of those things that we've just talked about, and you're going to think, am I going to put that on my website or on my LinkedIn or publish it in a place that I control, owned? Is it better to do that, or is it better to try to put it out into the world and publish it essentially and get more eyes? I've said it before, sometimes wrong, seldom in doubt. I think the huge opportunity here is for earned. Think about this. If you have a piece of content sitting on your website or your company's website, you have to then drive eyeballs there. You have to make sure your SEO is, on point. You have to be constantly, sharing that link out through all of, a newsletter or through social to kind of get people to visit your website. Most websites don't have a huge amount of traffic because you're going to go there to check out the company or the business or the person that you're maybe going to be working with, but you're not necessarily going to go there to browse, right? So earned media, these media outlets are spending so much money to get eyeballs on their sites. So if you're going to publish your blog on your website, that's great, but wouldn't it behoove you to go to cnbc.com and have all the eyeballs that they have at cnbc.com on your piece potentially? I think that to me is kind of a no-brainer. So I say owned versus earned in terms of where to place your content. I think, earned wins every time. When it comes to blogging versus bylines, a blog, basically blogs are kind of typically a little more informal. They're essentially the same thing, but blogs by definition, I think, are a little bit more informal. They typically, again, are reliant on you to drive traffic there, to get people to read it, to get people to look at it. A byline, on the flip side, is a little more professional, and it is something that by, our working definition is placed in an outside website, outside of your owned channels. And again, you get visibility and you get, the SEO and the benefits of all the eyeballs from that media site. here I think the winner is, I don't want to say unclear, like a magic 8 ball, or like try again later. But I think here the winner really depends on your specific goals. If your goal is to drive traffic to a website that you own, then absolutely, you want to have a fabulous blog there. I mean, what Seth Godin did with his blog is like, the gold standard. So if you want to create that kind of a product and that kind of a brand and that kind of a thought leadership platform, go for the blog, absolutely. But if you have a different goal, if your goal is to be kind of associated with that positive halo effect of a Forbes or a law.com or one of those other websites or news outlets, then then you want to be probably leaning more towards that byline. So here it's a little bit of a draw because it really depends on your goals. Now, when it comes to publishing on your website versus your LinkedIn, the answer is they're both winners, because if you are publishing content on your website, you should absolutely be sharing it on LinkedIn, but you need to do it in 2 different ways. And this is something that a lot of people don't take advantage of. If you have an article on your website, we'll call it an article for this purpose. If you have an article on your website, you want to share the link on your LinkedIn profile, potentially ask your company to share it on their company page, etc. But you also want to consider publishing it on LinkedIn as well. Now, LinkedIn has, when you go there, you can post, right? Pop in a link, make a comment, share an image, share an infographic, whatever that looks like. And then all the way to the right, they now have a button that's a little clearer than what it used to be that says write an article. It used to be publish, post publish. I think people got confused by that. But now it simply says write an article. And when you open that up, it gives you what amounts to like a WordPress blog page. Top secret tip, you can publish the same content there as you can on your website, because the Google crawlers don't, like, they're what do they call them? I call them crawlers. The little bots on Google, right? The little Google spiders, I think they're called, will not kind of flag you for double content in the way they will, republishing things across the web on LinkedIn, because they don't crawl the content on LinkedIn. So you can get away with publishing your article on your website and publishing it as an article verbatim on LinkedIn. And then that way you're getting much more eyeballs on your content. So for website versus LinkedIn, I think always share your content in both places and publish in both places. And there may be some questions on that because I know it's a little confusing. So we'll hold those to the end. All right. Pitching your byline. You got to write it. You're going to have a hard time reaching out to editors or reaching out to news outlets if that is your goal, and saying, I'm going to write about this. They're going to say, write it, send it to me. Because a lot of people suck at writing, and a lot of people don't know all the things that we've just talked about, right? A lot of people don't know these tips and tricks to really create usable, good, high quality content. So write it first, share it with a friend, shop it around a little amongst your network and get some feedback on it first. And then figure out what your media target is. Get, real clear on that outlet, get real clear on that audience, review their previous coverage that's in your swim lane. If they, are always covering topics related to what you do, figure out how you can be different, right? How you can have that strong point of view, but also see what those clues and cues are about the kinds of content that they write, the length that they really like to write, even the format of the article. Are they really focused on 4 tips, 3 ways, or can you be a little more fluid with that? The next piece is to check those submission guidelines. Again, they're really up and out. These media outlets are hungry for good content about explaining what that is. So check for those submission guidelines. They're available. And then the last one is, tweak your lead and make it timely. So you may have this, in our world, we call it evergreen content. Like, it could be published anytime because it's just good information. We're talking about bylines today. I could give this talk, hopefully in a couple of years. I could have maybe given a version of this talk a couple of years ago. But if I'm looking to create an article and I want to talk about why, again, so what, who cares, why bother? The why bother of it is me tying it into something that's happening right now. I might write an article about creating original content and tie it into the fact that, right now, as we're all home and kind of captive audiences, there's more of a need than ever for good, high quality content. So take advantage of it now. Strike while the iron's hot. Making that up, but I think you understand how to try to make that timely. And the lead, again, is really just your content, your insights, your advice, your point of view is probably going to stay the same. And the lead is really just the top of your article. It may even be your headline and the way that you tee up the topic you're talking about, but that's the lead in journalism. And I think the bottom line here, again, if your content is of service, if it is not a blatant, look at me, hire me, I'm so great, all about me, you're going to have a better shot at this. So how to merchandise? We talked about this. In fact, this is the exact same slide for those of you that attended the press conversation. You have to make this content work for you. So you're going to want to share it on social media. Let's say you place that article and it runs in healthcare.com because that's, a big audience for you. Okay, great. So you've placed this article, it's got your name on it. They're driving eyeballs to, health.com. If they're driving eyeballs there, they're maybe sharing your article in their newsletter. They're working their end. So what are you doing, right? You want to be sharing early and often on social media. You want to be very specific to share it differently based on the channels that you're going out to. Your Twitter post for this article is going to look different than your LinkedIn post. Twitter, you've got less characters, obviously, but LinkedIn, you're also talking to a very specific business audience. Twitter, maybe a little bit wider than that. You want to stagger your promotions. You can go out early and often, but you can't do it all at once. Like, don't be that person that posts the same thing on Instagram and Facebook the same day at the same time. It's annoying for the rest of us. And you're going to start feeling spammy. You want to always tag the journalist. You want to give some love back to the outlet on your channels to make sure that they see you promoting their content. A lot of these journalists are getting, these editors even are getting that you've worked with judged on, their content being leveraged. So if you worked with a fabulous editor, maybe give them a shout out or give them a tag. And then share it in your own newsletter. And we'll talk about newsletters in just 1 minute. Featured on your website, right? You want to even think about adding it to your signature, as seen on, as featured in. Those are great ways to leverage these pieces. And then, this is when you can actually use it to sell. So you can give this byline article to your sales team and say, here, we've been published here. Use this in your outreach. Use that vehicle of that fabulous of service content and have them leverage it for sales, or you can leverage it in your own sales. But there is that difference. The content itself is not a sales piece, but it can be used in the sales process. So newsletters, I know. Everybody's kind of tired of newsletters, but here's the deal. The New York Times wrote, Joe Biden, just channeled Joe Biden. Here's the deal, guys. Newsletter best practices, or newsletters in general, are kind of, what did he say? The guy, there was this huge article in the New York Times about it, and the guy basically said it's kind of the new social network. You can actually, if you've got a fabulous list and you've got fabulous content, you can get so much bang for your buck with a good high quality newsletter, almost more than you can with even a paid social media campaign these days. And I can actually, I'll make a note, I'll share that New York Times article on newsletters, because I think it's pretty powerful and interesting. But in order to have a good newsletter, because we all have the newsletters that we delete. I don't know why we don't unsubscribe. I do it too. I just delete them every day. And then we have the others that we're really looking forward to. Like every day at 4 o'clock when the New York Magazine's The Cut comes into my inbox, I'm like, stop the presses. And I want to sit down and I want to read it because I know that it's got interesting stuff in there that I want to read that's going to be potentially pertinent to my clients, pertinent to the media. So I'm always checking out New York Magazine at 4 o'clock when that comes out. So be the version of that newsletter in your world. And the way to do it is to be strategic and thoughtful. So you're going to want to start with what we call an editorial calendar. Back in the day, that's what news magazines would sell their advertising against. They'd have topics lined up for the whole 12 months, all 12 issues, and they would have this editorial calendar so they would know what each issue was going to focus on. You really should do the same with your newsletter. Now, you can have a newsletter that comes out quarterly. I would say that's the kind of minimum. You can have a fabulous quarterly newsletter that knocks it out of the park, or you can have a weekly. Don't do it daily. Daily is too much. But I think, you can go down to weekly if you got that kind of time or you have that kind of team. But newsletters are great to when they're really thoughtfully planned out. So have those features just like a magazine. Have, the section of kind of in the news, right? That's appropriate. You can promote your highlights. But again, you want to start with being of service. How are you creating this editorial content so that the people that are reading it are getting value? You're not going to brag and you're not going to sell, but you are going to share those highlights. You are going to have, the couple of bylines that you've, placed. That's a part of the newsletter that's very appropriate. But you may want to consider creating original content just for that newsletter. Now you'll use it there first, and then you'll use it a bunch of other places, right? LinkedIn, website, place a byline that might be a little different. You're going to use that content other places, but having some nice original content for that loyal readership of your newsletter is a nice way to reward them and also to get them excited about opening your newsletter and excited about reading it. Another thing that newsletter is curated content, and for each article she tells us why it's important. Boom, that's interesting to me. I appreciate that. You're the expert telling me why it's important, and you're the expert who's curated 6 articles that, because I'm interested in what you're talking about, I'm going to read because you told me why they were important and you told me they were important, right? You want to use existing tools. Like, don't go reinvent the wheel with your newsletter. Sign up for MailChimp. Go to HubSpot, use the stuff that exists and just make sure that it integrates with any other CRMs or any other systems that you or your company are using. And then this is, I think, maybe the most important thing, have a clean list, right? We used to joke that back when I was working at this agency, a lot of times we would ask the interns to run the media list for us for a first pass. And it would come back and it was 9 times out of 10, it was a disaster because they didn't know what they were doing. And we were just trying to give them something to do. And it would come back and it was a disaster, right? And we were like, look, I could send out to every single person on this list. And sometimes there were hundreds on a media list. But if they're 60% are the wrong people, I'm not getting any results out of this, right? So if you've got a solid 150 people on a mailing list and all of those 150 people and you know that they're the right audience for this list and you know that their emails are correct and you know that because these are people in your network, that's awesome. I know people that have a 20,000 person mailing list for their business. It's all crap. Nobody opens, the wrong email addresses, they get kicked back. They're not clean. It's not a clean list. So list hygiene, which kind of sounds gross, but I hear that all the time. List hygiene is really important. And so you want to be, you want to be thoughtful about that. And you want to be speaking directly to that audience. So make sure you got a good list. So original content. Really quality is key. We've talked about that from the beginning. This is your time, your turn to share your point of view. You're creating it. You're writing it from scratch, right? So really layer on your unique point of view, explain, to the audience why this information is important. Really use this as a leadership tool for your, again, clients, prospects, networks, potential employers, potential employees, really be clear on that audience and make sure that your point of view reflects that. And then make this work for you. It can't be the tree that falls in the woods, that nobody hears. You really have to take that one piece of content and find 10 ways to share it, right? Because you put a lot of effort into it. It's not easy, but it is a fabulous tool that I think everybody can and should be using, again, in a thoughtful, strategic way with that end game in mind. So in keeping, I have to walk the walk. And we'll open up for questions in a minute. But essentially, what I want you guys to all think about this is I want you to think about not just thought leadership, but specifically original content as a business strategy. This is part of how you can grow your business brand, your personal and professional brand. It's really a fabulous tool that's available to all of us. I want you to feel as though you have a little bit of an understanding for how to do it and how to do it well. And I would love for you to kind of take action, think about, even if it's, even if you want to start with a really short piece just on LinkedIn, just to test the waters, to publish there and see what kind of feedback you're getting from your network. do it. Take a shot, create it, send it around to your friends, get their feedback. Like I said, just take that first step, because I think you'll be really surprised, if you followed the tips that we've talked about, how engaging this kind of, piece can be, and how much it can advance your goals. So there's me with short hair. I don't clearly I have COVID hair, but that's how to get a hold of me, and I can leave it up for a second, and then I know that we'll be sharing that out after the event.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. This was super helpful. And I know that I've received a few private messages from people, but also there's a few questions in the chat. So if you'd like, I would go ahead and allow the audience to take themselves off mute if you'd like to ask your question. And if I don't hear anybody, then I will ask it for them. But if you have a question, feel free to go ahead and ask.
I'll go.
Great.
Hey, Lauren, it's Chris Shane. When you're talking about these lists, should I spend a lot of time trying to create my own, or should I hire somebody?